So I'm going to give a presentation here about 3 papers that I chose to write a paper, or rather a literature survey about. The first one here is just called an optimum multi-level CPU scheduling algorithm. And we'll look at the paper later in the presentation. The second one here is called a new proposed dynamic quantum with readjusted round-robin scheduling algorithm and its performance analysis. And we'll see later in the presentation why they include a performance analysis in its name. They give a fantastic performance analysis of this algorithm. Further, the third algorithm that we're going to look at here is called an optimized round-robin CPU scheduling algorithm with dynamic time quantum. And we'll look at that paper as well, and how well it actually performs as a CPU scheduling algorithm. So let's start the presentation here. Again, I did a survey of just these 3 CPU scheduling algorithms to determine their implementation on operating systems. So I want to begin this presentation by emphasizing the importance of CPU scheduling. We want to maximize CPU utilization in some way. Basically, we need to minimize the need for wait requests, such as I/O requests or some other operations. Furthermore, we need to make sure that no one process hogs the CPU in any way. We need to minimize the amount of turnaround time, response time, and wait time, as well as limiting the number of context switches. But ultimately, we need to make sure that there is fairness involved such that we can prevent starvation of processes. That is, a process will not starve and not run if we're thinking about this in a ready queue type of way. Okay, just some considerations of the papers that are surveyed in this presentation. These are just some things that I noted. Each paper generally involves a single processor, or they consider a single processor environment. There's emphasis on turnaround time, wait time, and context switches. I thought it was pretty interesting that they never really touch base on response time all that much. There are a low number of processes, and this is needed for analysis. We really don't need a lot of processes to see that these algorithms run at a modified and efficient way. And something also that I noticed is that these algorithms are usually a modified form of round-robin implementations. I believe that's mostly due to fairness. Round-robin, at least from what I've seen, provides a really fair implementation for processes in a ready queue. All right, so we'll begin by talking about the first paper here. Now the first paper gives a really good, well, all 3 papers give really good overviews of CPU scheduling and why it's needed, but I'll only discuss it here in the first paper just for due time. So obviously here we have introduction of a process to the ready queue. It gets put on the CPU from, the head gets put on the CPU. And then it either ends, it gets swapped out, or it goes to the I/O waiting queue. And that's just a brief overview of this state diagram here. It's generally how processes follow, or how scheduling occurs within a operating system. All right, so we'll get right into the algorithm here of the first paper. Pretty much they add up all of the burst times of the processes, and then they divide it by the number of processes. This is done just to obtain the average time quantum for that specific iteration of the algorithm. So we assign that time quantum to each process, and then we shuffle the process, we organize them into ascending order in the ready queue, such that the head is at has the lowest burst time attributed with the process. And then if the burst time is less than the time quantum for the specific process that is pointed at in this loop, we allocate the CPU to that process until it terminates. After that, it's taken off the ready queue, of course. Else, the process will run on the CPU until it reaches the time quantum. Then it's added to the tail of the ready queue. Just some notes about this algorithm. We can easily see that starvation is avoided. The time quantum is calculated at each step, which is, I think, a must when we're working with round-robin implementations. And it prevents a static time quantum, which is quite nice. Yeah, that it chooses it dynamic. There's no more issues with choosing that static time quantum, so large processes don't really get hindered too much. Neither do short processes. Okay, so for the analysis of this paper, they consider 5 processes, each with different burst times. And as you can see here, we're analyzing wait time. So the wait time for this proposed algorithm, and I should mention this is average wait time, is either similar or less than the wait times of the other algorithms run on the same process ready queue. Similarly, the turnaround time is also less or equal or similar to some of these first come first serve, shortest job first, round robin, the generic round robin, and then the proposed algorithm is here in red. We can see that the turnaround time is less or similar than the other algorithms, consistently across the board, I should say. All right, just some quick notes about this paper. You'll probably note this about a couple of the other papers as well. There's a need for these algorithms to be tested on actual operating systems. This is to ensure that the analysis provided in the papers is going to be inherent when there's a large number of processes on the ready queue. Similarly, we can also see from this analysis that the algorithm promotes full CPU utilization. That is, the CPU is processing a job at all times, which is inherently what the scheduler's job is to do. Next, we're going to talk about this modified round-robin scheduling policy, and you'll see the round-robin aspects as we get into the algorithm. So let's just jump into it. This may seem a little daunting to you at first. However, it's quite simple. Essentially, we enter this loop that is waiting for the ready queue to be equal to null. If it is not, it enters the loop here, and then it finds the median in terms of burst time of the processes currently on the ready queue. So it finds the median burst time of the processes currently on the ready queue for that iteration of the algorithm. Then for each, they're going to organize the ready queue here. So for the first, the head of the ready queue is going to have the most amount of burst time. And then the second process in the ready queue is going to have the least amount of burst time required to finish the process. And it's going to keep going like that until end processes are in the ready queue, or have been swapped, I should say. Basically, it puts greatest, least, next greatest, next least, next greatest, next least, on and on until end processes are retrieved. Then it assigns that median time quantum here to each process. I thought it was interesting that they went with a median implementation rather than the mean or average implementation for the time quantum. That is, they did the median of the bursts instead of the mean, which I don't know, it was an interesting design choice, I believe. Just some small little notes. It's called the dynamic quantum with readjusted round robin, or DQ-RRR. Again, the median time burst time is used rather than the mean, which again is an interesting design choice, but it does produce some interesting results, and we'll see that here in the analysis. So they consider 4 processes in their analysis here with varying burst times. They go a step further too. They test it with arrival time equals to 0, and then they also test it with random arrival times into the ready queue, that is. They also test it in different orders of process admittance. That is, they test it in ascending order, descending, and random order. And we'll see that in the charts following. So first they test it with round robin, and as you can see here, QT is the time quantum. For round robin, there's one static one for their implementation of the algorithm. It's the median of the processes currently on the ready queue. CS is not critical section. It is context switches, which in the case of generic round robin, it's 12. In the case of DQ it's 7, which I think is a substantial decrease in the amount of context switching. Similarly, with average wait time and average turnaround times, those are also less, substantially less than that of generic round robin. Furthermore, we can see this again when we look at the average wait time. As you can see, DQ beats generic round robin in each case. Again, we see that for turnaround time as well. DQ beats round robin in each case here as well for turnaround time. Similarly with context switching, again, we see that DQ beats round robin. All right, just a couple notes. Again, this needs to be tested in an actual operating system. We need more processes to ensure that the hypothesis here that these algorithms will run better than round robin, that needs to be tested with more processes. The algorithm again does promote full CPU utilization. That is, the CPU is always working. Okay, we're going to do optimize round robin next as well. This is the 3rd paper in my survey. We'll just jump right into the algorithm here. So we arrange the processes in ascending order, and then we take the average burst time, as we did in the first paper, and then for every process in the ready queue, if the burst time of that process is less than the time quantum, or the average in this, the average burst time in this case, of the processes in the ready queue, then we execute the process, and then we take the process out of the ready queue, and then we go to the next process in the ready queue. Next, we execute, else I should say, if the burst time of the process currently being worked on is greater than the time quantum. That is, it's greater than the average burst time of the processes in the ready queue. They execute the process until it reaches the time quantum number. And then the burst time of the process is set to the burst time of the process minus the time quantum. This just ensures some overhead to make sure that the loop runs successfully and processes the jobs in the ready queue until they're finished. Until the ready queue is empty, I should say. And then, of course, after we get out of the loop, if a new job arrives, we go back to step 1, rearrange everything, and go through the process again, the algorithm again. Some notes. The algorithm's name, Dynamic Average Burst Round Robin, or DABR. And it does find the average burst time and uses it as the time quantum, which is different from the median. Which was used in the second paper that we looked at. And then it also changes the burst time during each iteration, which I thought was also an inherent cool design that they have. Just some notes about analysis. They do test it similarly with the second paper. They test it with arrival time equal to 0, as well as with random arrival times. It's also tested in different orders of process admittance, again, ascending, descending, and random order with respect to burst time. All right, just some comparison with other algorithms. I did mention that these papers do a great job with comparison and analysis. So on this left-hand side here, we can see all of the algorithms that they tested against. Again, this proposed algorithm is named DABR. It's all the way down here at the bottom to single it out. They also tested against generic round robin, DQRR, which is the algorithm from the second paper, and IRRVQ, SARR, which I implore you to go read the paper for SARR. It's actually quite interesting and written very well in terms of analysis. RP-5 and then MRR. Okay, so what they did here is they took the ascending, descending, and random for not only context switching, but waiting time and turnaround time, and then they added it together to see the total number of each. So we will analyze the total numbers for each: waiting time, context switching, and turnaround time. So as you can see, in terms of context switches, DQRR and DABR are both equal, and they're also the least in the list here of algorithms. Similarly with waiting time, DABR is less than all the other algorithms in terms of wait time. Similarly with turnaround time, DABR is also the least as well. So as you can see here, DABR is much better in comparison with the other algorithms. Furthermore, this paper was interesting in that it gave a percentage of waiting time and turnaround time reduced from generic round robin. I thought that was quite interesting to note. DABR here in this case has a 41.23% reduced wait time than generic round robin, and as you can see, as compared with the other algorithms here, it has the greatest percentage reduced from generic round robin, inherently making it the best out of all the algorithms compared, at least for that iteration, those processes that were tested. Furthermore, they also did it for turnaround time. As you can see, DABR has about 31% less turnaround time than generic round robin. Okay, after analyzing those three papers, I do have some concluding remarks. CPU scheduling policies are heavily needed. As evidence, it's quite needed. It is needed that we need an optimized scheduling policy. Algorithm testing needs to be on a real operating system, or at least some simulated real operating system environment, such that there can be more processes run. I'd be interested to see how hundreds, thousands of processes would react in reference to these algorithms that were tested and compared. Similarly, maintaining fairness. I've noticed that round robin implementations probably have the best fairness, since each process gets to run at least once in a iteration of an algorithm, of the algorithm. And lastly, modifying these existing algorithms should be pivotal to adapt to these multiprocessor environments, which are becoming more popular, especially in servers. And these are the sources. These are just the three papers that were used, as well as the dinosaur book.